Hello class. So as we get into Module 3, I wanted to discuss a few issues that we believe are going to be important as we go forward. First, let me make a statement that some might consider a little bit controversial, especially considering we're taking a class in learning theories and teaching strategies. But I would submit to you today that the link between the psychology of learning, which we know about from educational research and theory, and the educational practice of teaching is really not all that direct. And believe it or not, a similar idea was articulated over 120 years ago by the father of American psychology, William James. He did a series of lectures with school teachers called Talks with Teachers, where he tried to make explicit the value of an understanding of human psychology to educational practice. And this is one of his most famous quotes. He said, "You make a very great mistake if you think that psychology, being the science of the mind's laws, is something from which you can deduce definite programs and schemes and methods of instruction for immediate schoolroom use. Psychology is a science, and teaching is an art, and sciences never generate arts directly out of themselves." And this last part is critical. An intermediary, inventive mind must make the application by using its originality. Said another way, teaching methods must agree with psychology but cannot be immediately deduced therefrom. Instead, we need the inventive mind of a teacher, and that's you all, to make that translation. Okay, so now I think it's pretty clear that with that as sort of a framework, let's talk about learning principles. And we're going to be talking this week about learning styles. Now, learners have important individual differences, and you could probably come up with several. Learners have different study strategies that they use. Some work well, some don't. They have different goals. They may even have different emotions. Some may experience shame, and some may experience anxiety as it relates to learning. And these things matter. They can make a big difference when it comes to learning. But I would argue, and others have argued, that learning styles does not appear to be an important difference that matters much when it comes to learning. So let me explain what we mean here. I think most of you are pretty familiar with this idea of a learning style. Learning styles theory basically says that every individual has a learning style or a learning preference that works best for them. And over the years, there have been a ton of different schemes or models of learning styles that have been devised. In a recent review, there's something like 71 different learning styles models. On this slide, I've included just a few of those that I found on Google just by searching learning styles. Interestingly, an entire industry has grown up around these various schemes, with most of them focused on selling measurement tools to help teachers assess their students' learning styles, and then categorize the students as a specific type of learner, for example, a visual or an auditory learner. So what are we to do with these categories? Once we've categorized a student as a type of learner, what do we do? Well, this brings us to the matching, or sometimes referred to as the meshing hypothesis. It states that individuals have different learning styles, and so teachers can improve learning by matching or meshing their instructional methods to a given student's learning style. So, for example, if someone is a visual learner, then we should use teaching methods that use pictures. On the other hand, if they're a kinesthetic learner, then we should use teaching methods that use movement or some type of physical activity. And by doing so, the idea is that we're presenting content in a modality that helps these individuals learn best, thereby improving the effectiveness and efficiency of learning. So it's really meant to be a tailored approach, which makes a lot of intuitive sense. Unfortunately, most of what's contained in the learning styles literature has been largely debunked. That is, there's basically no good evidence to support the idea that matching your teaching style or your teaching method to a student's learning style has any positive effects on learning. And this paper from 2009, which was published in Psychological Science in the Public Interest, is really the definitive review article that put the nail in the coffin of the learning styles hypothesis. In it, the authors reviewed about 60 years of empirical literature, and they concluded, and I quote, "There is no adequate evidence to justify incorporating learning styles assessments into general educational practice." So in summary, what do we know about learning styles? So the first question is, do learners have different learning styles or learning styles preferences? And I think the answer to that is sure. If you ask students how they learn best, they will give you an answer about their learning styles or learning preferences. So yeah, it's probably true that many of us have preferences. Now, as a teacher, if you match your instructional methods to those learning styles or learning styles preferences, will it improve learning? Right? That's the really important question. Well, the answer to that question is a pretty definitive no. There's essentially no good evidence to support the meshing hypothesis. And then your final question is probably, well, is there a better way to think about this meshing idea? And the answer to that is yes. Before I discuss that better approach, let me mention this study that was published in the journal Medical Teacher a few years back. In it, the authors asked health professions education students about their study habits, and they also asked teachers about their teaching habits. In the study, they also asked them about learning styles. They said, do you believe that you, or if they were asking the teachers, your students, have a specific learning style? For example, visual or verbal. And you can see the results here. 91% of faculty answered yes, whereas 53% of students answered yes. But I don't see this as a really big problem. Really, it supports that first idea that sure, if you ask people about their learning styles and their preferences, they will give you an answer. That's not a huge issue. The bigger question is, does it matter? And should teachers try to accommodate those learning styles preferences? So they also asked on this survey, do you teach to accommodate those different learning styles? They asked teachers this question, and almost 80% of faculty subscribe to the meshing or matching hypothesis. That is, they report trying to accommodate learning styles. And yet, we just saw that 60 years of evidence tells us that this probably isn't an effective approach. Okay, so is there a better approach? Yeah, there sure is. And the better approach is to match your instructional methods to the characteristics of the content or skills being taught. So here's a pretty simple example. Let's say I wanted to help students learn the shapes of the different U.S. states, like Florida, for instance. Well, then I'm probably going to want to use images, like a picture of Florida, to help them learn the shape, as opposed to just describing the shape in words. And such an instructional technique of using visuals to help students learn shapes works for everyone, not just those who might describe themselves as visual learners. Here's another example that's a bit more relevant to medical education and health professions education. Let's say we're teaching a surgical procedure. In this case, we're going to want to include some instructional methods that allow for hands-on practice, doing the skills required to learn the surgical procedure, and ultimately become a good surgeon. Right? So again, it's not about matching the teaching method to the preferred learning style, like using hands-on activities for a kinesthetic learner. It's about matching the teaching method to the characteristics of the content or skills being taught. In this case, a psychomotor skill, like surgery. Here's one more useful approach that's better than the learning styles meshing hypothesis, and that's to take advantage of something called dual coding theory. This is one of 6 cognitive strategies that are known to be effective. And there's a group called the Learning Scientists, and if you Google Learning Scientists, you'll pull up their website. It's fantastic. They talk about these 6 cognitive strategies. They're listed on the screen. But let me mention dual coding theory. This is the idea that when we combine auditory and visual information, learning is enhanced. And that's because humans process auditory and visual information through 2 separate cognitive channels. So when we as teachers present the same information in 2 formats, both words and visuals, it gives learners 2 ways of remembering the information, thus improving memory and recall, thereby improving learning. Now, because dual coding theory involves presenting information in auditory and visual form, it can start to sound a lot like learning styles, but it's really not. Remember, according to the learning styles theory, we should provide the visual learners with only visual materials and the auditory learners with only verbal explanations. But dual coding theory says no, we should give both groups a relevant diagram and relevant verbal information to go along with it, and then encourage them to integrate the two. Bottom line, combining pictures with words can be helpful for all learners, not just those who like pictures and describe themselves as, for example, visual learners. Okay, so that's what I wanted to cover today. You're going to look at several other videos and do some more readings. You need to make your own opinion here about whether or not you think learning styles is a good approach. And then we're going to debate that question on the discussion boards. So we look forward to that, and we'll talk to you soon.